Assalamu alaikum. I'm your host, Hena Zuberi, and welcome to another episode of Justice for All Now on Muslim Network TV, America's only Muslim-focused TV channel. You can watch us on satellite Galaxy 19, Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. Today, we'll be discussing the crisis in Gaza. It is with a heavy heart that I relay that it's estimated that by now 3,000 Palestinians, including children, have been killed by Israeli bombings since the start of the escalation on the morning of October 7. Over 5,000 Palestinians have been injured, and about 60% of the injuries occurred by the Israeli airstrikes were among women and children in the Gaza Strip. 260,000 people are internally displaced, and Gaza's hospitals are on the brink of collapse. Over 300,000 Israeli troops are preparing for a ground invasion. Today, I have with us our guest, Ayah Ziyadeh. Ayah is the American Muslims for Palestine's Advocacy Director. She's a Palestinian American human rights scholar, activist, advocate, and writer who maintains a track record in organizing awareness of Palestine and other crucial human rights issues. Ayah has completed her master's in international human rights at the Yosef Korbel School of International Relations. Throughout her graduate experience, she specialized in Palestinian rights, resistance, and the dynamics of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Ayah.
Thank you for having me.
I know it's a very difficult time for you and your organization, the people that you are fighting for. Can you tell us what is happening in Gaza? What has it been like for you and your advocacy? And what are you hearing from people on the ground?
Yeah, it's been a horrible week. And the reality of Gaza has been amplified, I think. Like you mentioned, over 3,000 Palestinians have already been killed and then over 70,000 wounded. As of this morning, it's been confirmed that over 430 of these killed have been children. There's been over 23,000 homes completely destroyed, 10 medical centers and counting, and over 50 schools have been destroyed by Israel's airstrikes. And unfortunately, because of the power outages we've been seeing, the numbers are ever changing and we're not able to keep track of them. And unfortunately, the truth has been drowned out by Israeli propaganda, which is being recklessly amplified by US media and elected officials. On Sunday night, the Israeli Minister of Defense announced that the complete total closure of Gaza in retaliation to what happened on Saturday. And he publicly stated that no electricity, no food, no water, and no fuel would be allowed for Gazans. Everything would be closed more than the already the siege that Gaza has been under for the last 16 years. And he quoted, he said, and I quote, "We are fighting human animals and we will act accordingly." And this has been a declaration of collective punishment, which is a war crime under international law. And that's exactly what we've been seeing unfold for the last week with the support and enablement of our world's powers. Again, Israel's been doing this for decades. It's not the first time it commits a war crime of collective punishment and targets civilians. It's literally carpet bombing entire neighborhoods and cities in Gaza. And although it's been under siege for the last 16 years, this is a total siege, meaning it's been completely cut off of all food supplies, electricity, water, and fuel. One of our very own, Zarifa Baroud, has already lost over 6 of her family members. Their homes have been destroyed. My other colleague, Tahir, his family's building was bombarded and destroyed. Luckily, they were able to make it out. This is hitting close to home too. We have people that are losing their family members, people that are losing their homes, and more importantly, we keep talking about civilian collateral damage, and the numbers have completely preceded what occurred on Saturday. It is not the same. The attacks that Israel is taking on Gaza have been incredibly disproportionate.
So, for those in our audience who may not know what a total siege means, or what a blockade of Gaza means, can you explain to them, are people free to exit and enter Gaza? Is it easy to rebuild these buildings that they're bombing? What is the life of an ordinary Gazan like?
Yeah, so Gaza has been described as the world's largest open-air prison. It's the second most densely populated area in the world, and it's home to over 2.1 million Palestinians. Palestinians in Gaza cannot leave or enter as they please. It's very, very difficult. It is impossible for a Palestinian or anybody else pretty much to come in through the occupied side. In some occasions, Palestinians are able to enter through the Egyptian border. You are talking about Israel having full control over their water sources. They have, I believe their water is 94 to 96% contaminated. They don't have clean water. This is all year round. This is outside of what's happening right now. Israel always has control over Gaza's electricity, and that's exactly what we saw happen on Sunday. They immediately cut off all electricity, and that's why Palestinians have been holding on to any energy that they have. And it's only very few wealthy families that have solar generated power that they can function off of. And that's exactly why we're seeing a lack of reports coming out in the last day, because reporters and civilians have all lost their power. Food shortage, aid is incredibly limited. There are very few organizations that are allowed to provide aid to Gaza. And in fact, it's been prevented all week. Even Egypt was being threatened to have their relief trucks bombed if they attempted to deliver aid. And in the last few days, Israel destroyed the only exit out of Gaza, and the Rafah crossing into Egypt was completely shut down. With over 3 bombings in the last 24 hours, last 48 hours. So life generally for Palestinians in Gaza is extremely difficult.
So we keep hearing about these warnings that the Israeli government is giving the people of Gaza, that we're going to bomb and you should leave. Where are there any safe corridors? What recourse do the people of Gaza have?
There isn't any. You're talking about 200,000 Palestinians seeking shelter in 88 UN schools that have been made into emergency shelters. That's their quote unquote humanitarian corridor. There's no way in and no way out. So the Israeli government's grace of we are going to attack Hamas, so all civilians should exit, is sinister, I would say, because the Prime Minister of Israel knows very well that there is nowhere for Palestinians to leave. There's no way to exit Gaza. In fact, yesterday there were reports coming out of Palestinian medics being allowed to enter Gaza by Israel. And then as soon as they entered, Israel attacked with airstrikes in that area. So we lost several medics as well. So again, this goes back to collective punishment. There is nowhere for Palestinians to go, and the Israeli government knows that very well, as well as the US government.
Now, much of this war is being fought on the airwaves as well. So there's been a complete media coverage of the Israeli carnage that happened there. But what are you seeing that is being shown in American media and Western media, corporate media, and what is not being shown?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, Israel has been pushing deadly propaganda. So you are seeing, there were reports coming out of Hamas beheading babies and raping women, and that had not been verified. And in fact, there were multiple Israeli reporters that came out and refuted those claims, and said and debunked those claims and said that that is not valid. And then you had our own president come out publicly yesterday and say that he had seen footage himself of this. And the White House had to come out immediately after and walk it back and say that he lied.
Mm.
But the lies have already been told, and the impact of those lies we've already seen. We've had multiple media sources and elected officials and celebrities and social media influencers were reckless enough to amplify this propaganda. You're seeing people post pictures of Gaza, bombarded Gaza, with text over it saying prayers for Israel, I stand with Israel. So the narrative is being controlled by Israeli media and uplifted by the US. And what we're in fact seeing happen to Gaza is being claimed to be happening to Israel, which is incredibly detrimental, and Palestinians are paying for this. And I'd really like to point out as well that it's not just Gaza that's being bombarded right now. While Gaza is bearing the brunt of this, the Israeli occupation forces announced that it'll be providing settlers and has provided settlers throughout the West Bank with around 1,000 M16 rifles, which are presumably US-made rifles. And it's completely shut down the West Bank and isolated it. The last report I saw was over 18 Palestinian men already killed by settlers. I'm sure that's increased by now. And Israeli occupation soldiers have also been murdering Palestinians who have been protesting the airstrikes on Gaza. So you're talking about collective punishment against all Palestinians in the entire occupied territory of Palestine.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to discuss the impact of this propaganda, as well as on Palestinians and as well as Americans. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the United States President Biden making statements, giving Israel an open license to kill. Much of what is being said sounds like pro-Iraq war propaganda, especially the points about the slaughtering of babies. This is something that the American public has heard before, that the Iraqi army was slaughtering Kuwaiti babies and taking away equipment from hospitals. And therefore, that is the reason why, along with the weapons of mass destruction, the United States had to go in and attack Iraq. Ayah, as you are advocating in congressional offices with this sort of propaganda and frankly lies being said from the president's mouth, how has this impacted your advocacy?
It's honestly been incredibly difficult. I don't want people to lose hope in the progress we have made for this movement over the last decade. I think we've made substantial progress, but in terms of a Palestinian American, it has felt as though all of the progress that we've made has deteriorated overnight. The propaganda being uplifted by US elected officials and media has been horrifying, to say it the least. And as a Palestinian American, it's been gut-wrenching to witness a government that's supposedly representing me and my fellow Palestinian Americans and people in general quite literally enable mass genocide and recklessly uplift this propaganda is devastating. And the message that Biden has been sending to Congress and all other elected officials is that the US moral compass literally ends at our allyship with Israel. It says that our ties with the Israeli government is more valuable than human lives. And again, the numbers are not being reflected. I have seen so many statements come out from elected officials all over the country on the federal level, on the state level, on the local level, CEOs of companies condemning Hamas's attacks on Israel, on Israelis. And while that is valid, there has been no condemnation of the Israeli government and the mass violence and the war crimes it has committed on Gaza and continues to commit. There has been no seemingly no value of Palestinian life. We've been deemed as subhuman, like we don't matter. There has been no mention. And right now, I just got an update from Defense for Children Palestine that the Israeli airstrikes have killed 500 Palestinian children now in Gaza, and the mortality rate in Gaza has been 1,537 so far. So you're talking about 1/3 of this fatality and mortality rate being children. And there has been absolutely no mention of that. Instead, our administration has prioritized uplifting deadly propaganda that Hamas has beheaded babies in Israel, which has proven not to be true. And yet, the lives of Palestinian children are not deemed valuable. And that not only is detrimental to our government as a whole, but it's also threatening the lives of Arabs and Palestinians within the United States because it's sending the wrong information to the American public. And we've already seen Palestinians and pro-Palestinians being attacked in America over the last few days. I mean, I believe there have been 3 Palestinians or pro-Palestinian activists already hospitalized because of this detrimental propaganda.
And this is something that we're also seeing on coming out, as you were saying, out of elected officials' mouth. The mayor of New York making a statement equating protesters and those who are standing with Palestinians with terrorists. This is something that is so, I mean, as someone who's worked for American Muslim rights for the past 2-3 decades, this makes me feel like we are going all the way back to the time right after 9/11. We are hearing, and if American Muslims for Palestine could tell us more about this, there are fears in the community of masajid and the community being surveilled. Mm-hmm. What have you heard about this, and how can the community react to this?
Yeah, I mean, the other day, President Biden tweeted that all national, state, and local feds will be on the lookout for any quote-unquote Hamas identifying or supporting individuals. The ADC, the Arab American Discrimination
Committee
organization, has already gotten so many reports from Palestinians and Muslims being approached by ICE and the FBI. So it's becoming incredibly unsafe for our own community. And the best advice that I could give is you don't have to be quiet about this issue, but know your rights. Know that if you are approached, you have the right to remain silent. You don't have to speak. There are a lot of resources coming out. I highly encourage people to check out the ADC and CARE National. They're distributing many resources on this issue.
Now, one question that I often get from especially young people who perhaps they know about the Palestinian struggle, they know about the occupation, and young Americans, but they do not understand the United States' role in why is the U.S. backing this war? Why is the U.S. sending billions of dollars in missiles and weapons? What benefit does the United States get from perpetuating this 50-year-old war? Israel's been at war for quote unquote, they just say it, they declared war. They've been at war for the past 50 years.
Yeah, I think one thing I do want to specify is I think the use of war, which I think everybody is using right now, the term war also falls under propaganda. This is not a war. It has never been a war. A war has to be equal sides, 2 militaries fighting against each other. We don't have 2 militaries fighting against each other right now. We have occupation. We have a siege on Gaza. we have ethnic cleansing, settler colonialism, and collective punishment and mass murder. That's what's occurring right now, not war. And the benefit of the United States is that it has been Israel's greatest ally, not for 50 years, for the last 75 years since the establishment of the Israeli state. And for years now, the United States has provided significant military aid to the tune of $3.6 billion a year to Israel, which is currently being utilized in this situation. And I think it's important to note that this is a systematic issue. There is no disconnect between the United States and knowing what is occurring in Israel. It's simply the fact that the United States is Israel's largest ally. And I think it's worth noting that in this administration specifically, we have President Biden, who is a self-proclaimed Zionist. I mean, in the 1960s, he himself said that if there wasn't a Zionist state, that he would create one himself. Mm-hmm. And so there is no disconnect, and the US is very aware. I would like to point out, though, however, is that you are seeing on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, the younger generation is completely disavowing the American government's opinion on this issue. The American government, as it stands, does not reflect on the American public. The American public, generally speaking, does not actually support the US government stance and response on this issue right now.
Definitely, I can echo that. I can see that yesterday or this morning, the vice president had a post up on her Instagram, and it gave me a lot of hope to see the comments. Every other comment, more than that, 90% of the comments were in support of Palestine, in support of the people of Palestine, asking for the stopping of the use of American tax dollars to support this sort of vicious genocidal campaign. We're going to take another short break, and we'll be right back. And we'll be talking to Ayah about things that you can do to support the people of Gaza. Welcome back. We've been speaking to Ayah Ziyadeh from the American Muslims for Palestine. Ayah, you were talking about young people and a change in the beliefs and the thoughts that people have about the Palestinian cause in the United States. So now young people in universities who really believe in this cause, what would be your advice to them at this current moment? What would be the best use of their time and their advocacy?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of people be really active on social media, which I think is incredibly beneficial right now. And the one thing we should be doing in order to surpass the propaganda and also the censorship. We're being incredibly censored right now on a larger scale than ever before. So that's the number one thing. But I would like to remind you all to ensure that you are sharing the correct information. Make sure you're following reputable organizations and resources that are outright sharing the correct information. I've been seeing a lot of people show up to rallies, which is great. But as an American right now, I would really like people showing up to these rallies in numbers to take that energy and that effort to their elected officials, right? The US has the opportunity and the moral responsibility right now to act swiftly and decisively, and unfortunately, they're not. And we are the ones that have to place as much pressure as possible on our elected officials in order to urge them to end Israel's violent bombing campaign on Gaza and the immediate removal of the blockade. And that's the most effective thing that we can do right now. The Zionist constituency does not outnumber us. However, they are contacting their elected officials and amplifying the propaganda we were just speaking about at a much larger rate than we are showing our truth. And so we should be bombarding our elected officials with phone calls. Their phone lines should not stop ringing from us. Their emails, showing up to their offices. I mean, we should be communicating with our elected officials on every level, the national level, federally, your members of Congress, your senators, on a state and local level, all of your elected officials, because everybody has been talking about this issue in one way or another. And we should be placing pressure on them and showing them that we are here. We pay them. We fund their salaries with our tax dollars. So they should be listening to us. And the Palestinian American constituency is just as important as the Jewish constituency. And yet we are being entirely dismissed. And so we are asking for a few things right now from the US government. Our first and most important demand is for elected officials and the administration to publicly call for an immediate ceasefire in order to prevent further loss of life. The second thing is to halt weapon shipments to Israel as long as it continues to violate its obligations under international and US law, which is constant. Israel is constantly violating international law in and out of this specific climate that we're in right now. Israel violates international law year-round, and as a country, we should not be funding them. And as constituents who pay tax dollars, we should be angry because our money is going towards that. Our money is being utilized right now to commit mass genocide on the Palestinian people. The third thing is to prioritize the immediate delivery of humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza, given that Israel simply does not care and has cut all electricity and resources from the Palestinian people. Two things directly from actions in Congress. There has been a resolution that has been released on Tuesday from Representatives McCall and Meeks, which entirely dehumanizes Palestinians by blaming them for Israel's actions and fails to express any concern over Palestinian deaths whatsoever. Nearly 400 members of US Congress have signed it already as original co-sponsors, and we need to request them to vote no on this resolution. Additionally, Senator Ben Cardin, who's the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, said that he's going to move forward with legislation which will focus on providing Israel with quote unquote what it needs to defend itself, which includes the replenishment of missile defense for Iron Dome. And we saw this very exact thing play out in 2021 as well. So I urge all of you we've made it easy for you. Our sister organization, C4 organization, AGP Action, has released an action alert highlighting all of these demands. It takes a couple clicks. All you have to do is go in, put your name and your address. It already has an email drafted for you for your senator and representative in Congress. And then it also has a call option, which I highly encourage you to do both. Send those emails and the call. The call script is there for you. You are likely going to go to voicemail as well, so it doesn't hurt to do it. There are other action alerts coming out from organizations that support us, like Jewish Voices for Peace Action, Adalah Justice Project, USCPR, many action alerts. I urge you to fill them all out and copy and paste the text and send it to your members of Congress multiple times. Call them multiple times. We need to be bombarding their offices every single day and let them know what our opinion is on this issue.
Thank you so much for that. These are absolutely important. And I can say this to those of you who are listening. When we walk into congressional offices, we know that people are monitoring those calls. They know exactly how many people have called on an issue, how many people have emailed on an issue, and those reports are sent up the chain to your elected officials even though you may be talking to an intern or a legislative correspondent when they pick up the phone, but those numbers, those requests, those demands are being transferred over to your elected officials. And it takes literally 5 minutes of your time to make the calls to your two senators and your congressperson. So thank you so much for that, and thank you to AMP for making it easy for people to take those actions. Justice for All has an action alert on this too. We are concerned as a organization that works on genocide for the past 30 plus years. We are seeing markers of genocide in this particular attack. The cutting off of the water supply, the aiming on hospitals and killing of babies. This is particularly concerning to us. And as we're doing the analysis on the situation, this is different from previous attacks. It's much, much more severe. And we urge people to take this much, much more seriously. One question that, as we come to the end of the show, is how do you suggest Muslims handle advocating for Palestine under this kind of scrutiny? You gave some great suggestions on making sure that the information that they're sharing on social media is fact-checked and proper. But when especially people at work, they're placed, it's almost suffocating because as soon as you bring up or show any sort of support from Palestine, you're equated with violence or barbarism. So what would your be? So you do this on a daily basis, and you're in corridors of power saying this. You're not just saying this to someone's boss. What are some of your top tips in passing that scrutiny but making your point?
Sure, yeah. I'd say first and foremost, as Muslims, right, we have a duty under God to stand by justice by all means, Muslim or non-Muslim. And while the Palestinian issue can be deemed a Muslim issue to the Muslim population, it is not a religious conflict. It's a human rights issue. Therefore, we should be standing by it, period. So the first thing I would say for your inner peace is to remember God and remember our duty to justice, and remember God's words during these moments of time. The second thing is the knowledge thing. Making sure you have the correct knowledge is important again, and I'll reemphasize that. The reason there's so much scrutiny is because the US has worked with Israel for the last 70 years to uphold this propaganda, right? We were just talking about the propaganda. The propaganda that we're seeing now is not new. This has been, the way that Israel has upheld its narrative for decades. And the reason that you see in the US, it's shifted now because more and more people are being educated on it, especially with the use of social media. But it was long believed that this was a two-sided issue. It was described as a conflict, that Palestinians are the aggressors, and that is as a result of the tactic of propaganda. So making sure as a Muslim, even if you're a Palestinian yourself, it doesn't mean you know everything, right? So making sure that you know the history of this issue in order to better explain it, and that you know you have the correct knowledge of the issue overall outside of the current events. And I would say you can go into this with respect, but I mean, we're seeing a lot of people right now either being fired or resigning from their jobs because of the stance. Mm-hmm. But I think the goal here is it's going to be difficult regardless. But the whole point is to reach a threshold within our elected officials, to reach a threshold in our workspaces, and to reach a threshold within the American public, which we've already seen happen. More and more Americans every single day, the more they learn about this issue, the more they don't stand with the Israeli government. And so I would say remain steadfast and remember God and your mission to stand by justice throughout this time. I cannot say that it won't be difficult, but your biggest weapon is your knowledge. Having the correct knowledge and spreading the correct knowledge is the best thing that we can do during this time.
Thank you so much, Ayah, for your work and your strength. Our du'as are with you. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We were discussing the crisis in Gaza and the Palestinian cause with American Muslims for Palestine's Advocacy Director, Ayah Ziyadeh. So let's talk about the crux of this. Many of us know what is happening on the ground. We've read about it, we've heard about it. Now, but what can we do? So these are some of the things that I would like to suggest to our audience. We would urge you to amplify American Muslims for Palestine and AJP Actions Alerts, as well as the many organizations who are working on this cause, and bombard, as ISA said, our elected officials, phones, their emails, let them know that we are watching and we know what they're doing and saying, and we voted for them too. Our vote matters as much as anybody else's. We urge people to mobilize for Palestine Advocacy Day. Other things that people can do is urge their khatibs to give Jummah khutbahs. If you're a Christian, to give sermons. If you are a Jewish ally, to give sermons in synagogues and in other places of worship on Palestine. Remember, there are many Christian Palestinians as well. We urge people to organize lectures and teach-ins and workshops for your community members on the history of the Palestinian struggle and its connectedness to the conditions of the Ummah and other important struggles, like the struggles of the Indian Muslims, the Black struggle for justice and freedom, and other issues. We need to view justice as indivisible. Remember, when one part of the Ummah is bleeding, the other feels the pain. We believe that all our liberation is tied together. We urge people to attend the National AMP Convention and link with their staff members and their national office. We also suggest joining protests in front of embassies and other places across the country. Don't let the propaganda scare you into not going to these protests. We urge you to call our representatives and take action in stopping our administration from giving more money to the occupation. We also urge that Muslim student associations and Student Justice for Palestine organizations, students can work with each other to amplify the truth. Community awareness is extremely important. We feel like there's a lot of compassion fatigue in the community. I also urge you to supplicate. Make special dua for your brothers and sisters that are living constantly under fear and terror in Gaza and other occupations in other parts of Palestine. And if they're not in your dua, they're not in your thoughts. So we urge you to educate others about the history of Masjid al-Aqsa and Palestine. This is our duty as Muslims. We have to share the magnitude of the human suffering under apartheid, occupation, and blockade. Help your neighbors, co-workers, and classmates understand the media bias and share the stories of Palestinians for over 7 decades. And most of all, give from the depths of your souls. Support advocacy groups and humanitarian organizations, Palestinian organizations that are fighting to defend Palestinians. These organizations are fulfilling their fard, and human rights groups such as ours, as well as established and registered humanitarian organizations. This is a fard kifaya, a collective obligation on behalf of the Muslim community. I will always tell you to advocate. Challenge TV channels, radio stations, newspapers, and social media influencers for their dehumanization of Palestinians and erasure of Palestinian suffering. Demand fair coverage of Palestinian voices and stories. Challenge elected officials from President Biden to Congresspeople and other statewide representatives, countywide and elected officials, and call them out for their selective human rights and for not condemning Israel's bombing and killing of Palestinians. Call and email your Congresspeople. I'm going to say that again and again. I hope today you leave with many tools in your chest to help support our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Thank you so much for joining us on the Justice for All Now show on Muslim Network TV. And as always, thank you to my producer, Asim Amin, and the team at Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum.